My grandpa gave me my sense of humor, and he probably saved my life. When we lived in Davenport, Iowa, and Grandpa and Grandma lived in Muscatine, which is about 30 miles from there, we would go and visit on the weekends. And we'd go on Sunday to this little Quaker church, and we would sit, and Grandpa would, when they sang the hymns, his deep bass voice would just anchor that whole congregation. And as I sat beside him, I could feel his power and his strength, and he was really strong, even though he walked with this crutch. After church, we would go back to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and Grandpa kind of took me under his wing. He would teach me stuff. And after he showed me something, he would say, "See, Stu?" And then he'd wink. And for years, I thought that he had this pet name for me. I thought he was calling me Stu. Well, it turns out that "see, Stu" in German means "do you see?" So I had the right idea, but the wrong language. Well, one day I was at Grandpa's house, and I was looking through this photo album, and I ran across this picture of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day. It was from a newspaper, and the caption said that this was Louis Eustace Herwig, a young man of sterling character. I had no idea what a sterling character was, but I thought, man, that's what I want to be, a young man of sterling character. And Grandpa was also he was funny. For my birthday, once, he gave me this big box. It was all wrapped up in birthday paper. And I opened that up, and inside that was another box all wrapped up. And another one, and another one. There were 5 boxes. And I opened the innermost box, and there was a red onion. That was my birthday present, a red onion. Once at Thanksgiving, the whole family was gathered together. There was probably 25 people around this table. And I asked Grandpa to pass me the cookie plate. And he grabbed it, turned the cookies, dumped them on the table, handed me the plate. That's the kind of thing that Grandpa did. Well, when I was 7, my parents got divorced, and we moved from Davenport to Muscatine. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to move, because Davenport, I really kind of liked Davenport. There was a lot to do. I was the smartest kid in 2nd grade. My teacher loved me. I sat behind Nancy, and I loved her. And I was the toughest kid. I was really tough. I could beat up 6th graders. And then got turned on its head when we moved to Muscatine. The kids in Muscatine were really tough. I got beat up 2 or 3 times. I kind of rethought that beating up thing. And the first day of school, I found out that there were a lot of things that they taught in 2nd grade in Muscatine that we were not going to learn until we got to 3rd grade from Davenport, right? So I was behind. I was doing all this remedial work, and I think that the teacher was angry with me because of that. I think she resented me because she was really mean. One day, about half an hour before class was out, I had to go to the bathroom. And I raised my hand, and the teacher did not acknowledge me. And I was starting to get desperate, so I was kind of like waving my arms, jumping up and down. And at one point, she looked right at me, and she shook her head no, and she went back to teaching. And I couldn't hold it. I let go. And so there I am sitting at my desk, 3rd grade, dripping. And I thought, well, by this time it's about 5 minutes, 10 minutes before class is out. So I thought, well, maybe when the bell rings, I can just put my head down and act like I'm asleep, and the kids will just, you know. Well, that was a great plan, but the girl next to me saw what had happened, raised her hand. The teacher acknowledged her immediately as she said, "Steve Daut peed his pants." So humiliated, I got up, had to get up in front of the whole class, walked out the door, I dripped all the way home. And the next day, I made myself sick. I was like, my stomach hurt. I was in too much pain to go to school. And I told my mom that. She was having none of it. She said, "No, you gotta face this thing." And so after an argument, she kind of pushed me out the door, locked the door, locked me outside. And I laid there on the porch just screaming bloody murder. I was in way too much pain to go to work, to school. And after a little while, Mom came and grabbed me, dragged me over to Grandma and Grandpa's house. We were living right next door when we moved to Muscatine. And she dropped me off and said, "I've got to go to work. You deal with this kid." And Grandma started in lecturing me. Oh, I had to go to school. I had to deal with this thing. And Grandpa said, "Let me deal with it." So he took me downstairs. There was a bunch of cabbages down there. He said, "We're going to make sauerkraut." Well, the way Grandpa made sauerkraut, it was like 2 steps. First step was he had this, what he called a kraut cutter. It was a big wooden board, and it had 3 diagonal blades in the bottom. It had these rails that went along the side, and there was this open wooden box, open on the top and the bottom, and it fit right in those rails. You could slide it back and forth. So you'd put the cabbage in that box, and you'd slide that back and forth across those blades, and it would slice that sauerkraut into fine, thin little ribbons. And he had this big 5-gallon crock, and he put a bunch of that cabbage in the crock. He'd put salt, a layer of salt, more cabbage, more salt, more cabbage, fill that thing up, and then he'd take a butter churn, and he'd start smashing that stuff down and pack it down, bruise that stuff, and it would give up its water because of that salt, and you'd keep filling that thing up until it was full. And once that was done, then you'd get it all compacted in there, and you'd take a layer, pretty thick layer of cheesecloth, and lay that on the top, and then you'd put these great big rocks, big heavy rocks on top, so that that cabbage was compressed and submerged underneath that briny, salty cabbage water. That was step number 1. And step number 2 was you leave it set. So after about a week, the whole basement smelled like something had died in there. And that's when it started working. And then you'd leave it for another 3 or 4 weeks. And by that time, then it would smell like whatever it was had died, had resurrected and died again. And then you knew it was done. So you put on a gas mask and you go down there and you take those rocks and the cheesecloth off of there, and there would be a layer about like that of this green, slimy, rotten, nasty cabbage. And you scoop that off of there, and underneath was the sweetest, most incredible tasting sauerkraut you can ever imagine. So that day we had done step number 1. We got that all packed in the crock with the rocks on it. And we'd been standing up and pounding on that thing all day. And we went upstairs, and Grandpa was walking really slow. He was leaning on that crutch of his so hard, I thought he was going to break it. We went and sat down in his easy chair, and he asked me to get his kit from the bathroom. I brought the kit out, and he had rolled up his pant leg. And it was the first time I saw this leg. It was at the shin. It was bent like this and kind of twisted in. So his foot was kind of angled in. And right there where it was bent, the skin was bright red and it was stretched so tight it looked like it was going to split wide open. And he put some liniment on that and then wrapped it with an ace bandage and took a handful of aspirin. And I asked him what had happened. He said, well, when he was about my age, about 8, he had broken that leg, and his parents were new immigrants. They only spoke German. They didn't really have much of a network yet. They didn't know how things worked, and so they set that leg the best they could, but it was never set right. And over the next couple of years, he broke that leg 6 more times. And of course, it was never right after that. So I realized from the time he was my age, every day, he had experienced moments of excruciating pain, but he never let it define who he was. And after that aspirin kicked in, he told me this poem. When I was young and had no sense, I bumped my head against the fence. The fence was rough, and I was tough, and you bet your life I'd had enough. And he said, see, Stu? And he winked. And he went to sleep. Now, I can't tell you that everything went perfectly in my life after that, but I can tell you this, I never again was able to convince myself that I was in too much pain to go to school. Thank you.
All right, hey, thank you so much for being out here this evening. Before I let you go, though, I want to remind you one more time that I would love to hear your story. If you think about the stories you heard this evening, stories of redemption, stories of being lost and being found, stories of relationships, stories of strength, stories of laughter, stories of love. I am interested in every single one of those. So consider that email on the back of your program. Our next storytelling event is in May. I think I already have storytellers lined up for that, but I hope to do one in August and November, and I am looking for those months. So think about it. Thanks again for coming out, and good night, everybody. Oh, hit the merch table. Music and Steve's book. Good night.